Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. This week, two tales of light in the dark, how people came together during Spain's unprecedented energy blackout, and a story of faith, loss and renewal on the ancient Catholic pilgrimage known simply as the Way.
And that's the sound of sweat being wiped off the stump of an amputated leg with a paper towel. Probably not a sound you've heard so far today, but one you get used to when you walk with Hervé.
That's all here on Inside Europe. What do you think an energy blackout sounds like? Well, quite noisy it turns out. Those sounds there were recorded by our Madrid correspondent, Ashish Sharma, during the unprecedented energy blackout which hit Spain, Portugal and some areas of southwest France on Monday. The outage, one of the worst ever in Europe, started in the afternoon and lasted through nightfall, affecting tens of millions of people, disrupting businesses, hospitals, transit systems, mobile phone networks and other critical infrastructure across the Iberian Peninsula. So, what was it like to be caught up in the middle of it? Well, in Ashish Sharma's case, rather more mundane than you'd think.
Well, Kate, I suppose it started quite funny in a funny sort of way. So I decided to do a little bit of exercise and go to my local gym, which I don't do too often, but having a bit of time to kill, I thought, why not? And I'd sort of finished all my exercises. I just literally about to leave the changing rooms, and suddenly the alarm started blaring and all the lights went out, and I could literally hear all this cursing coming out from the showers, because there were still some people in the showers obviously, and the water must have just suddenly run out as everything powered down. And I just remember thinking, oops, that's going to be fun for them. Walked out and then suddenly saw there were just clusters of people leaving buildings and wondering, well, what is going on? Because obviously, you know, I'd been in the gym, I hadn't got my radio switched on or anything. Then I tried to get a signal and I couldn't, and thought, well, this is really, really strange, because there's a government building in front of the gym, everyone piling out, a post office, people piling out. And then I realized that there were clusters of people on the streets that were just like literally dashing across it, and thinking that doesn't make sense, and saw the traffic lights weren't working, and then began to listen to the conversations, and people saying, oh yeah, you know, just went out, everything just blacked out, I don't know what's happened, blah, blah, blah. And figured, okay, we've got some sort of a power cut. And as I was walking back home, you know, I could see some situations which began to look a little bit alarming. So there's an underground car park that has a very steep ramp, and there were like 6 cars that were like in a queue behind each other, because the very first car couldn't get through the barrier, because obviously it's electronically operated, and the cars behind it were beginning to reverse up the ramp onto a very, very busy high street full of cars, no traffic lights and people crossing it. And then you began to think, okay, this is potentially something that could be serious. And then, of course, it just began to dawn that this was something far more serious.
I feel like this is a film that I've seen before, and the usual sort of script is that anarchy descends, looting, everyone for themselves. Is that how the good people of Spain reacted?
I have to say the good people of Spain reacted in a very good way. So I decided to take a walk down to the main junction from where I live, just because I was curious to see how people were you know, sort of cooperating and coordinating. And cars were very good. They were slowing down. People, especially elderly people, children, people that looked vulnerable were given a lot of attention. All the cars slowed down, let them go. Get across. It was good to see that some residents were helping some of the elderly. Supermarkets and shops were closing down, but the ones that I did look at, all the tin foods completely emptying out, and people were just filling up baskets with bread and buns. And, you know, you were wondering, well, are they preparing for a long-term blackout, or they're just panicking? And I got the feeling it was a bit of both.
And there were, of course, people stuck in lifts or in trains and tunnels and nightmare scenarios like that.
So we had something like 35,000 people that were trapped in trains up and down the country. There were scores of people that were trapped in lifts, including a pregnant woman, 6 children, and 4 adults that were stuck in a lift for over 3 hours in the Catalan region. There were issues with elderly people who were a little bit disoriented, a little bit concerned, and there were reportedly 7 deaths, which may be linked, although investigations are taking place, to the blackout. I think in a case of a family, they think that a generator that produced carbon monoxide may have been the result of the deaths, and 4 others are being investigated to see whether they could have been related to the blackout. So yes, there was some sad news, but generally I think people stayed safe. We didn't hear of any accidents, for example, on the roads, which was the main concern, I think, especially with schools letting out students early and young children perhaps not being able to be reached by their parents. There was a concern for that, but luckily there wasn't any reports of accidents as such.
Now, as with any sort of fast-moving news, there is always a tendency, I think, towards confirmation bias. I mean, watching this from afar, depending on which outlet you were reading, if it was an outlet that tended to see privatization of the problem, then that was what was causing it. If you were reading an outlet that was concerned about cybersecurity and Russia, then that was the cause. And then if you were looking at outlets that were more skeptical of a renewable transition, then the problem was Spain's and Portugal's very high reliance on solar energy in the grid. Now, the Spanish government, Ashish, and sorry, that was a very, very long preamble, but the reason that I'm saying all this is because the Spanish government has really cautioned against speculation for precisely this reason, right? At the moment, we simply do not know with any certainty, and it may be, weeks, maybe even months before we get a definitive answer as to what exactly went wrong. But in the meantime, of course, there is this big speculation space that's been opened up. I mean, you've been talking to people and experts about this. What's your sort of sense of the cocktail of possible possibilities that are out there at this stage?
Yeah, well, you pick up on it very well, Kate. It's very early to say at this stage what could be behind it. I can certainly tell you that Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, is hugely frustrated and very angry at the Spanish electric company, but also the private companies. And the reason is that he's had meetings with them since Tuesday, and he's been very, very disappointed at the lack of information that they've been giving him, the data that he wants his government scientists, for example, to pore over to try and figure out what caused this, because he has reassured Spanish people that this will never, ever happen again. But in order to fulfill that dream, he needs to know what exactly did happen. And he feels, and he's made it very clear, certainly in his meeting that he had with the private energy companies and the Red Electrica, the national electric company, which is private as well, that he's not been happy at the lack of information that they've been giving him in terms of the data and the build-up to what they believe is a lack of surge of power. And to give you an idea as to what happened, Pedro Sanchez said that there was a 5-second period when 15 gigawatts of electricity suddenly went from 15 gigawatts to absolutely zero. And what seems to be the case, what experts are saying, is that caused a disconnect from Spain to the rest of Europe. The whole grid system is connected because that's the way the system works. It's a bit like at home, if there's an overload, all the switches go off and then you have to go back to the sort of generator and just switch it back on again. And it's a similar system, but on a much larger scale. And to give you an idea as to what 15 gigawatts of power is, we're talking about all of Spain's 5 nuclear power stations generate about 7.5 gigawatts. So you're talking about double the amount of 5 nuclear powers worth suddenly switching off in 5 seconds. And that's unprecedented. And you can see now, when you look at that kind of side of it, how much it would have affected the whole country and also Portugal. So his concern is how did this happen? The reason why he's angry with the private companies not giving him that data is because, of course, from the other side, from the private company side, because no one knows what caused this, if it turns out that there could have been an error involved, be it human error or some kind of a technical error caused by any one of the companies, well, you can imagine the amount of indemnification they may have to pay in terms of, the damage that was caused, the loss of economic income would be certainly put down then on the shoulders of a company. And while no one knows what happens, no one really wants to give their cards away. And I think that's the issue. And so that brings in lots of factors. And we talked about people thinking that there could be a cyber attack. Well, that also hasn't been ruled out, although, as you said rightly, the Spanish electric company has said no, that's not possible. But in fact, on Tuesday, Spain's highest criminal court has said that it will take an investigation into the fact that there could possibly have been, or they can't rule out the possibility that there was a cyber attack. It may seem unlikely, but when you don't really know what the cause is and you're still speculating, yes, there was an influx of power or there was a loss of power that caused a trigger system that switched off Spain from the rest of Europe, which is why Spain had the blackout. Well, you can't prove that. Everything else then becomes, available on the table to discuss.
So many questions still to be answered, and I am sure that Ashish Sharma will be following up on them for us in future episodes of the programme. For now, though, I wanted to end with the joyous sounds that he recorded as the light in Madrid came back on. And that is the point at which apparently Ashish's daughter rushed off to charge her smartphone. We totally get it. I'm Kate Laycock. You're listening to Inside Europe. The late Pope Francis has been laid to rest in Rome. Next week, the doors of the Sistine Chapel will shut on some 135 cardinals, and the Catholic faithful, as well as many of the world's TV crews, will wait outside until the white smoke can be seen, announcing the election of a new pontiff to take his place. There will be time enough for politicking then, but for now we wanted to pay our own form of modest tribute to the man they called the People's Pope by sharing with you the story of a journey. Not just any journey, it's the journey known to Catholics simply as the Way or Camino, the ancient pilgrimage route, or rather routes, that end in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Over 400,000 people walk the way each year, but we're travelling it in the company of Hervé, a man who has trodden it once before, but who set out again from Rome on one good leg and one artificial one. Our reporter John Lawrenson joined him to keep him company.
À l'époque, j'étais militaire. Et je suis parti en OPEX au Liban.
I was in the army serving in Lebanon. I had a week's leave and a group of us went to Cyprus where we hired motorbikes to explore the country. A car pulled out in front of me and hit me in my left knee. I went flying over the top and hit the ground. I didn't black out, but perhaps that was even worse because the pain was excruciating. I was taken to a military hospital and had 12 operations over a period of 2 years. In the meantime, I left the army, set up a landscape gardening business, and got married. But my damaged leg kept getting infected, and in 2018, when an infection rose above the knee, there wasn't any other solution, and I requested a complete amputation. A few minutes before the operation, I don't know how or why this idea came into my head, but I made a promise that if I managed to walk properly again, I would walk to Santiago. When I got my first prosthesis, my physiotherapist, Stephanie, filmed me to encourage me, to say, "Look, Hervé, you're walking." I watched the video when I was alone in my room and I broke down. My left leg was a metal tube, and it would be for the rest of my life. The mistake I made was to refuse the psychiatric help I was offered at that time. I thought I was strong enough. I usually start my pilgrimage days with the Lord's Prayer and 3 Hail Marys.
Allez. Au nom du Père, du Fils et du Saint-Esprit. Amen. Notre Père qui est aux cieux, que votre nom soit sanctifié, que votre règne vienne.
C'est difficile pour tout le monde, certainement. It's difficult for everyone talking about their weaknesses. Is it particularly difficult for men, do you think?
Oui, je sais pas.
I don't know. I think it comes down to the character of the individual. I'm not an expansive, open person. That's how I am, and in my family, that's what we're like. We have a saying in our family, march or die. In other words, just get on with it. I learned to walk with my prosthetic leg in almost half the time it usually takes, but mentally things weren't going well at all. In October 2019, I had a burnout, and I tried to commit suicide.
Voilà, donc tu l'enlèves. By the side of the road, Hervé stops and takes off his prosthetic leg. He used to hide himself away to do this, but has got more relaxed about that on the Camino, the path, the way. And that's the sound of sweat being wiped off the stump of an amputated leg with a paper towel. Probably not a sound you've heard so far today, but one you get used to when you walk with Hervé. He has to do this every hour or so when he's pilgriming, especially when the weather's hot, because sweat makes his stump slippery and his artificial leg can just fall off, which can cause surprise. This summer, he says, it happened when he was out walking, and just behind him there was a mother with her young son. He couldn't believe his eyes, he laughs. He won't forget that in a hurry. At the beginning of his first pilgrimage, Hervé had some more serious problems. There was a nasty moment when he took off his prosthesis to discover his stump covered in blood and pus. It was early days, he was still in Brittany, and he thought he'd have to abandon the Camino altogether. But he rested up a day, treated the wound, and learnt his first lesson.
Le chemin, il faut savoir le respecter. Et pour respecter le chemin, il faut s'aimer.
The Camino, the way, you have to learn to respect it. And to respect the way, you have to respect yourself. And respecting yourself means looking after yourself. You have to learn to deal with your wounds in order to keep going.
And there was more than antiseptic lotion and bandages to keep him going. He named his crutches Aude, after his wife, with whom, by the way, he chats at least once a day on the phone, and Philippe, after a brother-in-law who has also battled through bad times. He talks to his crutches a lot, he says, confides in them, and every morning, as soon as he's on his own, he raises them in the air and shouts, "Aude and Philippe, help me to walk." It's an impressive sight, makes him look about 10 feet tall.
Allez, Aude et Philippe, aidez-moi à marcher.
C'est passé en hôpital psychiatrique. You went to a psychiatric hospital after your suicide attempt and stayed there several months. Tell me about that.
Pour moi, c'était un peu une issue de secours.
For me, it was a sort of emergency exit. I needed help. But the atmosphere in psychiatric hospitals is a bit special, a bit grim, actually. You are among people who have serious problems, so it's quite tough. But looking around me, I saw people who were in much worse shape than me. That's a help, actually. You say to yourself that things could be worse.
Ton vœu. And your promise.
Mon vœu est revenu naturellement.
When I got out of the psychiatric hospital, that's when my promise came back to me, suddenly. And I knew I had to do it.
T'as réussi à te confier? Did you manage to open up about your suicide attempt to the other pilgrims you met on the Camino?
Les gens, pendant la journée, venaient vers moi.
On the way, people came up to me a lot to confide in me, to tell me about their problems. There was something about seeing me walking with my artificial leg and seeing that it was hard for me that made it easier for them to open up. That's the providence of the way. People tell you things they'd find it difficult to say in other circumstances because they can be pretty sure they won't see you again. So they confided in me, but it was frustrating because once they told me about their problem, we'd do a selfie and that was it. They'd leave and I hadn't confided in them. But in fact, I didn't want to. I didn't want to speak about my attempted suicide, out of pride and a bit out of shame. I couldn't find the strength to unload this burden weighing down on me.
In a classroom attached to a big grey and white striped marble church in the port of La Spezia, Hervé finds a plug to recharge his prosthesis and prepares his bed for the night. We'd phoned ahead to beg for somewhere to stay, and the priest said they didn't have beds, but we could sleep on the floor. Oh, great, we said, imagining mattresses. But on the floor is really what he meant. We rustle up a couple of yoga mats and, for covers, what look like curtains from a puppet show. Santiago de Compostela seems a long way away. I checked the distance on my phone, 2,196 kilometres. So what was it like, asked Hervé, when you arrived in Santiago that first time?
Et le jour où on arrive, c'est assez étonnant, mais le matin, je suis parti avec mes jeunes pèlerins.
On the last day, there were 5 of us who set out together instead of leaving separately as we usually did. We walked together and in silence. It was very moving. For the last 200 meters, we were all together, climbing down the steps, and I suddenly found myself in front of the cathedral. I got down on my knees and thanked St. James and prayed for my family. And when I stood up again, I burst into tears because I knew that it was over and that the following day I would no longer walk for the way. 20 minutes later, I'd got my smile back and we were all hugging each other, but still, arriving in Santiago wasn't how I'd imagined it. On the way home, I went to visit an old pilgrim I'd met along the way and told him how I'd felt, and he said, "Of course, because getting to Compostela isn't the end of your pilgrimage. It's the beginning," which I understood 3 months later. I had gone out for a walk and sat down on a bench. A woman came and sat next to me and we started talking, and she said, "Is it your prosthesis that makes you sad?" And without thinking, I replied, "No, it's my suicide attempt." At last I could free myself. I told her everything. It's by talking that you can free yourself. Thanks to this woman, it was providence. I love this word providence, because maybe she didn't come by chance.
C'est une providence, j'aime beaucoup ce mot de la providence. Parce qu'elle n'est pas venue peut-être par hasard.
After what was a memorably bad night on the church school classroom floor, Hervé and I hobble into the church for the early mass, after which we, well especially he, gets a blessing. For what for him is the very long, and I don't doubt wonderful, way ahead.
Bénédit le Père, le Fils, le Saint-Esprit. Amen.
John Lawrenson, DW, La Spezia.
That makes me think of the lines, "The way you can go isn't the real way, the name you can say isn't the real name. There is ancient magic in the way, whether it's the Camino or the Tao." This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. With all eyes on Rome this week, I found myself thinking of that Monty Python sketch, you know, the one I mean, the What Did the Romans Ever Do For Us sketch, where the list of grudgingly accepted achievements just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. Sanitation, medicine, irrigation, public order, all the rest of it. Well, I was thinking, what if we were to add reality TV to that list? Bit of a stretch, you might think, but hear me out. Over at DW's Don't Drink the Milk podcast, Rachel Stewart actually made quite a convincing case. So you be the judge.
Rome has been a constant throughout all my life. My grandfather was born across the street from the Colosseum, so I have lived my long life in the shadow of the Colosseum, and it's always been there.
And here we are, literally in the shadow of the Colosseum, far away from LA, in Rome, Italy. I'm with historian Alexander Mariotti, who has a distinctly gladiatorial look, very Roman with an intense chiselled beard. And it's an aesthetic he's leaned into over the years.
I think I do have one picture of... No, I've got 2 pictures of me as a gladiator on Instagram. There you go.
He scrolls to a picture of himself, scantily clad, wielding a sword, reenacting gladiatorial combat.
It's not bad, right? I only do it once a year. For anyone listening, I only dress as a gladiator once a year.
So, who better to introduce us to the gladiators?
So who were the gladiators? Well, the first thing is they were people. They were people like you and I. They were people with desires to be loved, to be adored, to be famous, to be wealthy. All very natural things that people still chase today.
In movies like Spartacus or Gladiator with Russell Crowe, the gladiator's tale is typically one of an enslaved man thrown into the arena to take part in a fight to the death. But Alexander explains it wasn't always like that.
They were pampered, professional, top prime athletes who were trained, who were taken care of physically, medically. Why would someone train somebody, feed them, and then they die in the Colosseum after 5 minutes? There's just... Economically, there's an equation that doesn't work.
Early on, most gladiators were slaves, or criminals sentenced to do their time in the arena. But as these games grew in popularity, more people began to sign up for gladiator schools voluntarily.
They're free men. So it wasn't just slaves.
Were they paid?
Yes, very handsomely too. You would get 2,000 sesterci as a signing up bonus. Just to put that in perspective, 900 sesterci is the annual salary for a Roman soldier. So you're getting 2 years' worth of pay of a soldier in one signing up. But when you fought, you could make anything from 13, 17 times the annual salary. So there's a huge incentive to become a gladiator. Why wouldn't you? Because it's an easy way to make a lot of money.
Well, there's still that little matter of potential serious injury or death.
Iuri, vincere, ferberare, feroque, Nakari.
The gladiator's oath. I will endure to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword.
Gladiators knew that there was a risk of dying. The means justified the end.
And how did the people who were watching really view the gladiators? Did they look down on them or did they idolize them?
Both. You know, you were the most sexually desired athlete of your time. So they were regarded as the lowest of society, but they were also admired greatly in society.
In Roman society, the term infame was reserved for those who essentially sold their bodies or gave up their autonomy, namely actors, prostitutes, and gladiators. And yet...
That moment the doors opened and the crowd went wild. What a drug, what an adrenaline rush. But what a sense that maybe your life meant something and people would remember you. And they were right. Here we are speaking about them 2,000 years later.
Truthfully, I didn't know it at the time, but I was seeking external validation. And so an area of my life growing up as a child, I didn't feel that I was good enough in the eyes of women. I was not really happy with my current job. I wanted something different. I felt that there was more to life than what I was currently doing.
Meet Clayton Eckhart. In 2021, he entered a different kind of battle. competing with 29 other men to win the heart of one woman on the 18th season of the TV dating show The Bachelorette. He didn't get the girl, but he did catch the eye of the producers, who asked him to return as the star of the next season of The Bachelor.
And of course, that was a big statement, you know, because it was like, wow, The Bachelor, the guy, like the actual guy. If I was being pushed as the most sought after man in America, it was going to make me feel special.
Was there any element of fame or money that also attracted you?
I was told that once you become The Bachelor, they all become millionaires. So, of course, I grew up in a small town where, you know, my family didn't make anywhere near that. We were blue collar. And I saw that my life could potentially change. It didn't bring any of that, or at least it did, but it was fleeting. I wasn't the most well-liked bachelor. I was kind of controversial, I would say.
The promise of love, money and adoration didn't work out the way Clayton thought it would. Stick around for the tea. But first, remember that gladiator oath? The one where they would commit to being burned and beaten and all the rest of it? I want to know what the reality TV equivalent would be. What are contestants sacrificing in return for a chance at fame and fortune?
Privacy is a big one.
This is Olivia Stowell, a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. And her field of study? Reality TV.
This sounds so serious, but like dignity to a degree. A classic kind of convention to create drama would be to either deny the cast members sleep, like waking them up at random times in the night, or starting filming really early, running filming really late into the night, providing a lot of alcohol, all of those kinds of things, which creates the condition where you have these sleep-deprived people who are sometimes inebriated, who are also really cut off from their life support systems. But yeah, I would say privacy, dignity, sometimes personal safety, sometimes reputation.
I don't know about you, but I'd say that's a pretty high price to pay. Many shows also require contestants to sign contracts accepting certain conditions, like being on camera all the time, having no communication with family and friends, having rationed food, and even accepting the risk of personal injury. And then there's the non-disclosure agreements. Luckily, these days nobody is forced into the proverbial arena. The contestants aren't slaves, and no modern court of law would sentence someone to a stint on a reality show. Anyway, reality TV in some form has actually been around for almost as long as the television itself, taking root in the United States before spreading around the globe. And the genre has really had to keep reinventing itself to keep audiences hooked.
Reality TV kind of has a few different early starting points, one of which would be something like Candid Camera in like the 1940s.
There's a camera in the back of this car here. Yeah. And the three of us are on television now. So what? Therefore, see? Are you out? No. What is this, a Candid Camera? Candid Camera. Oh, well, here I am on television.
I think the other like kind of watershed moment in the prehistory of the genre would be the PBS reality documentary An American Family in the 70s that followed a family living in California for like an extended period of time as the parents' relationship kind of dissolved.
I used to love to hear those birds sing until your mother started telling me how horrible they sounded, and now I'm down on birds.
All throughout the mid-20th century, there's all of these kind of like dating games, you know, or things like Queen for a Day, where you would have normal women competing to see like whose life was the worst, basically. And also clip shows like Cops.
Hello, man. Up on the car, man. Both of you, up on the car. On the car, man. On the car, man.
Things kind of really get going for what we think of as the genre today with The Real World in the 90s.
This is the true story. True story.
7 strangers picked to live in a loft
and have their lives taped
to find out what happens.
What? When people stop being polite. Could you get the phone?
And start getting real.
The real world.
And then kind of at the turn of the millennium, you have the sort of inauguration of programs that are recognizable to viewers today. So things like American Idol, Big Brother, Survivor, that really proved that this genre was a genre with legs of its own.
But you misread my meaning when I met you. Close the door.
And this is where the franchise really gets going. Some countries have honed the art of coming up with adaptable concepts and selling the rights to production companies abroad. Do you know where Big Brother, The Traitors, and The Voice all started out? Let me just ask Google Translate for a clue for you.
De Verraders.
The Netherlands. That was Dutch for The Traitors, by the way. So this genre keeps having to shake things up and push the boundaries. That's why we've ended up having dating shows where everyone is naked, or where the couple gets married the first time they meet. There have been shows about giving birth in the great outdoors, about brides competing for plastic surgery procedures in the run-up to their big day, or representatives from different religions competing to convert a non-believer to their faith. Okay, that last one never actually made it to air. At least not yet. But how much do these shows really have in common with ancient Rome?
I should expand my prehistory of reality TV. I shouldn't start with Candid Camera. I should start with the Colosseum.
It is the great-great-grandfather of every single stadium in the world, but it is the first mega stadium, the first superstar stadium to exist in history. And if you ask the emperor, it was the greatest political tool of its time.
So the emperor who commissioned the Colosseum, Vespasian, he came on the scene at a pretty difficult time.
Rome had just come off a civil war, had had 4 emperors in a year, and did not die of natural causes, and Rome was in turmoil. Vespasian was a man of the people, and he understood he needed a way to get people to love him, because the emperorship was basically in trouble. So he says, hey, listen, I'm going to build a public structure. It's going to have games, food, wine, free tickets, the greatest show on earth. So he does it to win back the people.
As the Roman Empire spread, gaining both territory and new subjects, leaders needed to get their new citizens on side. Arenas and the games were basically a really effective soft power tool. They were a display of wealth, but also an attractive part of Roman culture that people might want to be a part of. And when times got rough, a little distraction went a long way.
When there was turmoil, when there was disaster, there was more games. You'd say surely it was the opposite. There's a plague, that the Antonine Plague, which wipes out a huge swath of the living population at that time. So what do? You put on games.
Have you ever heard of the term bread and circuses? It's attributed to the Roman poet Juvenal. The idea being that all a population needs to stay content is the basics of food and entertainment.
If you feed them and distract them, it's really all most people are interested in.
In the centuries that have passed, there have been many different versions of circuses, live events, sports, music. These days, maybe social media or reality TV.
Reality TV has never not been political.
Here's Olivia again. The way she sees it, the modern-day circus of reality TV is still an effective political tool. But while politicians in ancient Rome used the gladiators to curry favour with the people, today's politicians sometimes take a more direct approach by stepping into the arena themselves.
Especially in the US, the obvious one being Donald Trump, but also Sean Spicer was on Dancing with the Stars. Sarah Huckabee Sanders went on reality TV. Reality TV has the power to present someone who was Donald Trump, a failing businessman, as being so powerful and so intelligent and so great in some way that I think that contributed to his public persona.
Olivia is of course referring to how Donald Trump went from starring in the reality show The Apprentice to the actual Oval Office. But dig a little deeper, and there's even more politics beneath the surface.
I also think that reality TV is political on the level of representation. On the most recent season of The Traitors, one of the cast members, who is a trans woman, talked about the fact that she was maybe one of the first trans people that viewers had encountered, right? She was like, I have this opportunity to show what it's like in my everyday life, or what it's like to be me.
What we see on screen matters, especially in shows that are claiming to represent and reflect reality. Back in Rome, the emperor has his mind on the spectators, but he also has direct power over the fate of the gladiator.
Who chooses who wins? Well, the emperor does. He cares about what his perception is in the public domain. So he asks you, the spectator.
He needs to give the people what they want, so he checks the mood of the crowd.
So the gladiator's lost his weapon, that's an automatic disqualification. The other gladiator puts the sword towards him. The gladiator lifts his finger, which is a symbol of asking, for mercy. And once the finger was raised, then the emperor stands, or whoever's giving the games, and he looks at the crowd. And the crowd decides through a gesture or a shout who they want to win, and that's who wins.
I absolutely hated them when I came off the show.
Here's Clayton Eckhart again, reflecting on how he felt about the makers of The Bachelor after the show aired.
When things were shown, I felt that they were blown out of proportion. I said, oh, no, you're missing all this context. And so I tried to basically I pinned everything on them.
Okay, for anyone who didn't catch this season of the show, it's time for a recap of all the drama. Clayton ends up falling for 3 women. There's this week called Fantasy Suites, where the Bachelor gets to invite his top 3 women on an overnight date, one after the other. Clayton tells all 3 women he's in love with them. He sleeps with 2 of them. This, as you can imagine, goes down terribly, with the women and with the TV audience.
I mean, there was no body double. So everything that people saw was me. Was there some missing context at certain points in important conversations where drama was involved? Absolutely. There's always going to be missing context when you are trying to pack in 48 hours of film into 2 hours.
But aside from the power of the edit, which happens after the fact, I want to know if Clayton can remember any time that the producers actually interfered during filming.
The order of the fantasy suites.
That's those overnight dates I was talking about?
I wanted to put one of the girls, Susie, first, and they told me I couldn't. And so they made me switch her to third.
Susie is the one he ended up choosing, by the way. The only one he didn't sleep with.
They knew that I was in love with all 3 of the women, but that, I was basically at that point starting to lean towards her as the one that I was going to choose. And so my opinion is they believe that had I put her first, that I would have just basically called everything off beyond that. And I ultimately, though, said, fine, we'll put her third. And that led to the big blow up that occurred that I think would have probably have not happened had she have went first.
The big blow up is the women finding out what had happened. Clayton ultimately chooses Susie, but she refuses his final rose in a dramatic finale. This is the first time a bachelor is rejected in the show's history. Reality TV has fielded a lot of criticism over the years, for being fake and manipulative, for promoting unhealthy beauty standards, and for bad working conditions on set. But one thing has particularly stepped into focus recently: mental health. Contestants on many different shows have spoken out about the loneliness, anxiety, and even depression that they experienced during and after filming. How far things can go has been exemplified by Love Island UK, a show where couples living in a holiday villa compete for each other's and the public's affection. 2 former contestants and a former host of the show have died by suicide. Many shows now offer some form of psychological support during and even after filming, but it's not always enough.
I always had a psychologist on hand. I just didn't know how to adequately speak to them. So I couldn't get the relief that I was seeking.
All this reminds me of something that Alexander told me by the Colosseum.
The Romans had a philosophy called virtus. It meant mental and physical resilience. And the gladiators were the physical embodiment of virtus. It takes a lot, I think, to be that disciplined, but also to be that violent. And to have violence on tap is not a natural reaction. I mean, you have to have something wrong with you to feel that kind of emotion, to feel that fight, that anger that you can tap into. And if you don't, you have to find a way to source it. And that usually involves some mental gymnastics, which I don't think are a healthy thing.
Do I feel like I was a gladiator in the realm of reality television? I mean, yeah, sure. Because it's like, instead of me being faced with physical aspects that are tearing me down, I'm getting torn down mentally. And I think this is where some of the audience likes to watch to see how far can this person fall.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
These lines from the film Gladiator have become iconic, perhaps in part because they remain so relevant. Just like the spectators watching Russell Crowe's character Maximus brutally slaughter the other gladiators in the arena, we're bloodthirsty. We want drama, emotion, even suffering. But why are we so entertained?
I can't believe you would sympathize with blah, 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 or I love him and not her, or I want her to get with that person and not the other person, or that person reminds me of myself. And so I think there's kind of the sense of identificatory pleasure and also the pleasure of judgment.
We love to judge, especially from the safety of our own couch. But remember that whole bread and circuses idea from Roman times? Well, it wasn't originally so much a criticism of politicians. Juvenal was criticising the Roman people for taking less interest in participating in society or politics and allowing themselves to be placated or manipulated by mere food and entertainment. So what about us and our reality TV circus?
I do think it can be distracting. I think also part of it is the sort of numbing feeling, like the feeling that becoming numb to violence or becoming numb to exploitation or becoming accustomed to, humiliation or violations of privacy. I think it's a very effective analogy for the conditions of surveillance and the conditions of capitalism.
Some analysis of reality TV has suggested that it's priming us for consumerism, voyeurism, and surveillance. Not just in terms of surveillance cameras, but the cameras that we've turned on each other and on ourselves for YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
The omnipresence of cameras and the way that we sort of socially have become more or less very comfortable with being filmed sort of creates a reality televisual logic to everyday life.
Wait, are we all in a reality TV show right now?
I think yes. I mean, people today who can't remember a time before reality TV especially, imagine their life through the lens of reality TV. There's a scholar, Mark Andrzejewicz, who talks about this a lot, where he says the work of watching reality TV is the work of learning how to be watched by the camera and becoming comfortable with being watched by the camera. And so I would say, yes, I feel like life is a big, weird reality TV show, especially if you are someone who gets really into social media.
I promise I really didn't mean to ruin your next reality binge with this episode. But, okay, next time you settle in for a dose of reality, will you look at it any differently? Will you see the reality gladiator making sacrifices for their own gain, but also for our entertainment? Will you ask who the emperor is and what they want from us? And will you recognise in yourself just a little bit of the bloodthirsty spectator jeering from the stands of the Colosseum?
Challenge accepted, Rachel Stewart. And by the way, there are many other thought-provoking episodes of Don't Drink the Milk to be found wherever you get your podcasts, or indeed listen to Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're With the World, Public Radio's leading global news program.
We cover the biggest news events developing every day and give you the context you need to make sense of them.
And Carolyn, I also like our smaller stories, tales of discovery and human kindness, things that make us laugh.
Stories that kind of shrink our world and make us feel more connected.
Subscribe and listen every weekday to The World.
Whilst we are still in the business of learning lessons from European cultural traditions, Here is one that I discovered recently via PRX's The World. It's Swedish and it comes in the form of a word, lagom. Here is how The World's Bianca Hillier explains it.
When Mikael Klintman was a young kid growing up in southern Sweden, he remembers telling his grandma the common refrain, "I'm hungry." In turn, she taught him a lesson and said, imagine traveling back in time 1,000 years ago.
She said, you're at a Viking feast with food and beer and a platter of fish and porridge. So you ask, okay, how much can I take? And the answer you will get from your neighbor is, you should take lagom.
Lagom. It's a very Swedish concept that Klintman came to know as taking only your fair share, so there's enough left for everyone. It's a group-oriented mindset.
It comes from lag, which means team, and lagom means around.
Centuries later, practicing lagom remains central to Swedish culture, and it can mean a bunch of different things. For example,
we tell our teenagers, boys who have started to work out, well, do it lagom, don't overdo it, and so on.
The idea is also embraced in conversations.
You talk for a while, but then you make sure to listen and make sure to even it out.
In other words, say just enough and don't take up too much airspace. That's true in the Swedish business world, too, says Christina Rundkrantz. She's a consultant who helps people from different cultures work together.
Swedes have a very special business culture. It's focused on equality, it's the team.
From interns to CEOs, she says decisions are made through consensus so that nobody dominates the discussion. That example of lagom, she admits, can take a while.
It's good for certain products, I'd say, but in many ways, when the world is moving fast and we want an agile business culture, it could definitely be perceived as slow. Yes, you see it daily in Sweden, daily.
Nikki Brantmark noticed that when she moved from London to Sweden over 20 years ago.
It's a much calmer, slower pace of life.
Brantmark found the lagom way to be a breath of fresh air. Her corporate job actively encouraged a work-life balance, and she says lagom even came in handy during the COVID-19 pandemic.
People are very respectful of each other's space, personal space.
Making social distancing a non-issue. If it all sounds too good to be true, well, sometimes it can be.
Today, we have a widened wealth gap.
Mikael Klintman again.
Which makes the sense that we are one community a bit fragmented into smaller groups.
Klintman now studies the concept of lagom. He's a professor of sociology at Lund University. He says rapid immigration has also put a strain on some elements of lagom. And then there are the instances when people just take lagom too far.
When it becomes performative, then we easily get annoyed.
Years ago, he worked at the Swedish behemoth IKEA and once saw Ingvar Kamprad, the company's founder, crawling inside a delivery truck to make sure everything was packaged properly.
Multi-billionaire, of course, had come there randomly, and he always flew second class and so on. And that annoyed some people, actually, because you shouldn't pretend you are middle class or working class.
Klintman explains that being perfect at being lagom kind of defeats the purpose, because everything, including lagom itself, should be done in moderation.
Bianca Hillier with that piece, which was first aired on PRX's The World. And do you know what? I have got the message. All things in moderation. It's time to say that we have reached the end of the show. Inside Europe was produced by me, Kate Laycock, and Sam Baker, with thanks to sound technicians Siad Abu Sleiman and Gianluca Wald. Our feedback address is insideeurope@dw.com. We also, of course, always appreciate ratings and reviews on the various podcast platforms. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn.